Hello and a warm welcome to Federal special program Capital Beat. Home Minister Amit Shah's reply has just got over in Rajya Sabha just a short while back. And if you talk about the quintessence of his speech, it was almost on the lines of what Prime Minister Modi's speech was. It was full of uh, hatred and venom against the Congress, labeling it as anti-constitutional, anti-reservation, and much more. If I could just take you through the points what Amit Shah has said, just a few pointers to go through. Why did Ambedkar resign from the first cabinet of the country? Similar question, which I think Prime Minister Modi also raised. We don't want Hindu laws to dictate India's legal system, nor do we impose. That's what Amit Shah said. Then another pointer, Congress wants to remove 50% cap to give reservation to Muslims. Then Congress is anti-reservation party. We are trying to remove all traces of British colonialization. Then he says Indira Gandhi amended constitution to overturn Allahabad court's verdict on her candidacy. Then he says 75 years of change, people realized they carried a fake constitution. Then he says respect for constitution must be practiced, not just words. Then he goes on to say that Congress amended constitution to allow parliament to function with minimal quorum. That is what also he has said. Then he says Congress can't alter terms, reminds of the 42nd Amendment's extension. Then in another few points which he has listed out, it was a long speech. It won't be possible to discuss all the points, but these are the major ones which what he has highlighted. Congress betrays conscience by sitting in darkness on the rights. Then he says opposition blamed EVMs after loss. Indira amended constitution to block judicial scrutiny. So these are just a few pointers what Amit Shah said during the debate on Samvidhan. And how does one make out this speech? And does it look any different? And what is the message which the tone and tenor of Amit Shah's speech has sent out today? Joining me now is Professor Apurva Anand, author, columnist, and a professor at the Delhi University. Thank you so much, sir, for joining. We have Puneet Nicholas Yadav, senior editor with the Federal. Thank you so much. And I'll begin with Puneet. Puneet has been following the Parliament and the speech very closely. Puneet, to you first, what would you really say to Amit Shah's speech as far as the tone, the tenor, the facts, the distortions are concerned? Yes.
Well, Neelu, I think it was essentially on very predictable lines. There was nothing new to to analyze in the speech. It's an extension of what we heard over the 2 days of the debate on the Constitution in the Lok Sabha, and then yesterday and today in the Rajya Sabha, of course. It went on the same kind of trajectory that had been set by Prime Minister Modi, attacking the Congress. There was the attempts to isolate the Congress from its other partners in the India alliance, by raising issues of the emergency and how several leaders from the current allies of the Congress were also jailed, by raising the Kachativu Island issue, and then asking the DMK on what its stand was. So it was, it was not really a debate, a discussion to assess the Constitution. In any case, while it's all right to mark the 75 years of the adoption of the Constitution, my view, as I have mentioned earlier also, is, when you look at these MPs, and I'm not just talking about the MPs from the BJP, but across the aisle, for the lack of a better word, I'd say, these are all in their political stature, in their understanding of the country, of the ethos of India. They are such pygmies to actually be commenting on institutions, on a colossus like Pandit Nehru, on somebody, or Sardar Patel, or any of our founding fathers. And what the BJP has mastered is the art of course, misrepresentation, of blatant lies, and also selective quoting of texts and letters, and then attributing certain motives, which, if you actually read those letters, read the text, put it in the context in which those things were said, uh, you'll know how far from the truth the BJP's portrayal of the events is. Now, is the emergency a dark chapter in India's democracy? Can anybody say it was not? But the point is, what have you done to the country over the last 10 plus years that you've been in power without even invoking, an undemocratic emergency, which was, the imposition of which was not uh, unpopular opinion here, but the imposition of which was not unconstitutional. It was an imposition using a provision of the constitution. So it was undemocratic, all right. But I mean, what have you done over the last 11 years? That's the question. And I mean, that's clearly something that the BJP will never respond to. And I mean, they take the moral high ground. I heard the Home Minister mention uh, a comparative analysis of four amendments that the Congress brought to the Constitution and four amendments that we brought to the Constitution. And he said, the four amendments brought to the Constitution by the Congress were all to undermine the Constitution, while the four amendments that we brought were, to strengthen the vision of Dr. Ambedkar. And then again, it was back to selective quoting of text, misrepresentation of facts. And I mean, I have spoken at length about the context of the First Amendment earlier on your show, so I'm not going to go into those details again. But that's pretty much what it was.
Right. In fact, I'll come on that point to Professor Purvanand that, the same Nehru bashing, same Indira Gandhi bashing, even Rajiv Gandhi was not spared. And Congress is supposed to be a party which has been most unconstitutional, uh, the most anti reservation. And apart from this, Amit Shah basically had nothing to say except for pulling out some facts, which were completely out of context. What I want to ask you, sir, is that what has been the end goal of this debate? At the end of 4 days, you saw 2 days in Lok Sabha and 2 days in Rajya Sabha, where Lok Sabha ended with the Prime Minister's reply, and Amit Shah replied in Rajya Sabha. In fact, I'll ask Puneet that, why this confusion was there, whether PM was supposed to reply, he didn't reply, and why Amit Shah came in. But what has been the biggest takeaway of these 4 days, according to you, Professor Apurvanand?
I think I endorse what Puneet had just said, and I won't repeat what he has already stated. I think it was an opportunity lost. It's a lost opportunity because we were trying to assess the progress of the Constitution, how the Constitution has been practiced, and we are living in present. So we would like to discuss how Constitution is affecting our life and whether the present leadership of the country it believes in Constitution when we look at its deeds. And that is what is important, not the past, not even emergency. Yes, we can learn lessons from emergency, and as Priyanka Gandhi said, that why don't you learn from it? So if emergency, and this was, as Puni said, that it was implemented using a constitutional provision. It was done upfront. There was nothing hidden in it. And this was an extraordinary situation, according to the then Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi. And she was dealing with that. And therefore, she imposed emergency on the country. But what we are witnessing the last 10 years is not actually undeclared emergency. It's a totalitarian state that has now started oppressing citizens of India. And it's very different from emergency. And it's different from emergency in one other respect. It's that emergency affected all the sections of the society in equal measure. So be Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Sikh. But what we are witnessing now is actually directed against Muslims and Christians. And we should be very clear about it. And it's a totalitarian state we have now entered. And it's very different. So this is what we needed to discuss. We needed to discuss the health of our institutions, judiciary, election commission, media. Unfortunately, there was no seriousness on the part of, uh, of the government, because the government believes that by indulging in rhetoric, by attacking Congress, by again being sarcastic and hateful towards the earlier leaders of Congress, it will satiate its audience, that is its constituency, and it always keeps addressing its core constituency. It never addresses the whole nation, and that is the problem, and that was a huge disappointment. We also expected from the opposition to say certain things more clearly. For example, if
Yeah.
you can come to the parliament and speak about atrocity on Hindus in Bangladesh in very clear terms, what stops you from making the persecution of Muslims and Christians in India the central issue of intervention? That, unfortunately, we didn't see in this parliament. And that is the central issue of the day. You cannot shy away from this fact that persecution of Muslims and Christians is what defines our times in India. And marginalization of a whole population, two populations of Muslims and Christians, you cannot ignore it. And this is actually attack on the basic structure of the constitution. Because what is basic structure? It is protection of minority rights. It is in the basis of our constitution, but we didn't talk about it. I didn't hear, or I didn't read, and if I missed it, I should be corrected. I have not heard from any member that the most fundamental thing about Indian constitution is protection of minority rights. And that is something, minority rights, which has been attacked in last 10 years, from the office of the Prime Minister to the smallest leader or official of the Bharatiya Janata Party. And now what we see in India is communalization of bureaucracy and police, and sadly, it's creeping into our armed forces as well. And judiciary, obviously, what we saw in Allahabad is a testament to that. So these were the serious questions, but I think the opposition didn't address it as forcefully as it should have been done. We didn't expect it from the government, and we don't expect statesmanship from the government, because this was an occasion, a very solemn occasion. We were discussing constitution, and ideally, the national leadership would try to evolve a consensus, a voice of consensus. But what we saw was acrimony. What we saw was pettiness and smallness of the government. And this was not in keeping with the occasion which they were trying to address, the occasion of 75 years of the Constitution. And we should have been truthful. The truth is that this is the most serious crisis that the Constitution of India is facing. So we shouldn't be living in some false paradise that we are celebrating. There is nothing to celebrate today. This is an occasion when we need serious introspection. about the health of our institutions, about the health of our educational institutions. I teach in Delhi University, and I see what is happening to our educational institution.
In fact,
Everything.
you're mentioning about educational institutions, and I was just looking at the initial part of Amit Shah's speech. He says that युवा पीढ़ी और जो किशोर हमारे देश के हैं, as in the youngsters and the teenagers of the country, they will take home lot of material from these 4 days of debate. This is what he had to say, and I'm just wondering what is the big takeaway for the youngsters and for the teenagers out of this 4 days of debate.
Puneet has already said that, so I won't repeat that. But what I'm trying to emphasize is that I see the youth. I have not seen such hopelessness in the youth as I see it now. This hopelessness we need to address. The youth see no future for them. I see it in my university, the desperation of our young men and women and others. How do we address that? There's no pain, no concern in the hearts of our leaders, the officials in the government, and that is the more saddest part. What we've witnessed in last 4 days, there is not one quotable sentence from the speeches of the prime ministership, and because this was a sublime occasion, you were addressing a document which was formulated after long deliberation and in very violent days, very conflict ridden days. And just imagine the state of the minds of those who were sitting there. They were trying to think for the future of the country, but we forgot all that, we ignored all that, and that is the saddest thing.
In fact, I'll come to that point where you said that opposition failed in these 4 days. Puneet, if I may to ask you, uh, whereas opposition obviously has not been able to convey in many words as they could have. And it's not that they didn't understand the sensitivity of the moment. It wasn't as if Congress was not prepared to answer all those questions. Nobody could have taken all the credit away from Nehru or from Indira Gandhi or many others and several other leaders who were there. But even then, I mean, was their strategy wrong? Didn't they coordinate well? Where do you think was the lacuna as far as the opposition is concerned?
Neelu, when this debate was going on in the Lok Sabha, I had mentioned how the opposition was perhaps the biggest letdown of the debate, because what we
Yes.
heard from the government was pretty much on expected lines. It's not that the government surprised us with speeches that were unexpected. It's the opposition that has let down this debate, because it was for the opposition to point out uh, the misrepresentation and the lies in the government, in the speeches made by the Treasury benches. And I had mentioned earlier, and I'll elaborate on it again, that one, if you look at the sort of central pole of the attack of the government, it was the Congress and Pandit Nehru and the Gandhi family. Now, the least one could have expected was that the Congress, with 99 MPs in the Lok Sabha and smaller bench strength in the Rajya Sabha, but with fairly experienced leaders in the Rajya Sabha, unlike their MPs in the Lok Sabha, would have chosen its speakers more carefully and not based on the proximity or the fondness that the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha has for those MPs. So when you have somebody like, and I'm not going into the whole argument of whether Shashi Tharoor or Manish Tiwari, by virtue of being part of G23, has lost the confidence of the Gandhi family. But the fact is that both of them are brilliant speakers, and they can speak quoting from parliamentary text, from conventions, from books, from historical records. So when you sort of supersede them, but when you bench them, and instead you get um, a first term or a second term MP uh, who has a very limited worldview of parliamentary proceedings and of the country and of history and that kind of a perspective, you don't really get you can't expect them to deliver the goods. And as far as the wider India bloc is concerned, I think the the big problem, which I think is only going to get worse moving forward, is that one, of course, as I said in my opening remarks, that the BJP strategy was to isolate the Congress from within the India bloc, to which end I think it succeeded to a great extent. And it was for the India bloc, and again, of course, for the Congress leadership, but also for the leadership of the other India parties, to discuss a floor strategy, to kind of come to an agreement on what are the issues that we will collectively raise and who are the speakers that are going to be fielded from our side. What we saw, on the contrary, was a Trinamool Congress basically trying to show that we are better than the Congress, we fight the BJP in a better way. A DMK saying that the wrong decisions taken by the Congress were the Congress's own, we were not party to them. And RJD basically following the same trajectory. So they were all kind of it was a speech in self-preservation, and and that was the big letdown of this. Now, I mean, the 42nd Amendment, for example, that became a huge bugbear in from the center's side. Was there nobody in the galaxy of speakers that you had in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha from the opposition benches who could have made it not as an intervention, because when you not as a kind of off point of order remark, or because those thanks to a partisan chair don't even make it on the record, because there's protest and disruption and all, and they get kind of muted out. But as part of the main speech, was there no one in these ranks who could get up and point out to the treasury benches when they raised this huge objection and hue and cry, one speaker after the other, on the inclusion of socialist and secular in the preamble? Now, of course, the 42nd Amendment included not just the amendment to the preamble, it included a wide range of changes. But the issue of socialist and secular, as recently as earlier this month, the Supreme Court threw out a petition that wanted, and a petition moved by a BJP member, Ashwini Upadhyay, which wanted those words removed. And the Supreme Court threw that out and gave a very good context to why those words are important in the preamble.
Yes.
Nobody from the opposition had the good sense to get up and point that out. Nobody from the opposition also had the good sense to point out in their speech, in their main speech, that a few years after the 42nd Amendment was made, in 1978, Morarji Bhai's government brought the 44th Amendment to undo the damage caused by the 42nd Amendment. Now, in that government, you had the two leading lights of the BJP, now forgotten, of course, Mr. Bajpayee and Mr. Advani, as very key ministers. And when the 44th Amendment was made, the words secular and socialist were not removed. Whereas several of the decisions of the 42nd Amendment were repealed.
Yes.
So, was there, I mean, a Mallikarjun Kharge with 50 years of experience in legislation and parliamentary and assembly experience, or a Jairam Ramesh, or n number of other, a Vaiko for that matter, nobody who could get up and say that wasn't Bajpayee and Advani on board to keep the word secular and socialist on the statute.
Yes.
Are you not, today when you say that those two words had no business being in the preamble, are you not also in the same brush, painting Advani and Bajpayee as being opportunists or as people who were trying to appease a certain constituency? All those allegations that they made at the Congress. By virtue of being party to the government and important ministers in the Morarji government and signing off on the 44th Amendment, uh, Mr. Bajpayee and Mr. Advani was just as much party to the inclusion of the words socialist and secular. So I completely agree with what
Yeah.
Professor Apurvanand has said.
Yeah, but in
Yeah.
fact, the opposition coming from the opposition camp actually was very. The voices were muted, and if you remember, in between the speech, the way Amit Shah, started condemning the opposition, saying कि he actually told Kharge ji that अगर किया है तो सुनना पड़ेगा, and then later on he says कि सब
No,
बच्चों
but
को
I'm
रटाया
sorry.
about emergency.
No, but Neelu, I'm sorry, but this is exactly what I'm saying. That when when you try to make these interventions as an afterthought, listening to somebody's speech, the chair will simply not allow you. And we've seen that happen over and over and over again in both houses. Besides the fact that parliamentary convention, is that for if you're interrupting a speaker, the speaker has to yield. If the speaker has not yielded, you do not get the floor, and what you're saying does not go on record. So that is why I made the distinction that these points should not have come as interruptions, but as part of your main speech.
No, so which means it's very clear, Puneet, that not too much of homework and research was done before plunging into this debate by the opposition and specifically Congress.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we keep accusing the BJP of, kind of presenting to the country that nothing happened before 2014. India became independent after 2014 and all of that. But if you actually heard a majority of the speeches from the opposition side, at least in my view, I also thought that, I mean, not 2014, but I thought that, the history of while the subject may be 75 glorious years of the Constitution, we're only discussing 25 years as if, there's just, the last 20 years, what has happened is part of, the history of independent India. Because you only had instances, oh, 1991, this is what we did, 1996, this is what we did. And that's, of course, lack of experience of the MPs who were given a chance to speak, and the failure of the leadership of those parties to field better speakers.
Absolutely.
Now, I'll make one quick point. There's also, when I said this whole thing of quoting people out of context, and there were multiple things said about how, Dr. Ambedkar said certain things about Pandit Nehru, how Sardar Patel said some things about Pandit Nehru, or, various other luminaries. One, you have to understand that those people who are being quoted and quoted out of context were intellectual giants. They were people who, unlike the Congress or the BJP or, any of the parties of today, their leaders, you did not have a system of hero worship. They spoke as equals. And so if a Pandit Nehru was making a mistake, and he was a man, he was a normal human being, he is bound to make mistakes. If he was making a mistake, Sardar Patel would point it out. And it was always in a spirit of camaraderie, comradeship, and of taking the country forward. I mean, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. In 1955, Dr. Ambedkar gave an interview to BBC Radio. Okay. And it's an iconic interview. It's available on YouTube and all that. You can dig it out. Now I'll read out two lines about what he said with regard to his views. He was asked how he saw Mahatma Gandhi, and I'll read out two lines of what he said. He says, I knew him as an opponent. He had opened his real fangs to me. I could see inside the man as opposed to others who met him as his devotees, saw only the external appearance put on, he put on as a Mahatma. I feel surprised at the interest the Western world takes in Mr. Gandhi. He was only an episode in the history of India, never an epoch maker. Gandhi's memory is being kept. Gandhi has already vanished from the memory of India. His memory is only being kept alive because the Congress party annually gives holidays on his birthday and some other days. If this artificial respiration wasn't given, Gandhi would have been forgotten. Now, this is Mr. Ambedkar's view. Will anybody from the BJP today have the guts to get up, quote Mr. Ambedkar on Mahatma Gandhi, and say that and try to malign Gandhiji? Of course, they try to do it in other ways, but when it suits them, they also appropriate that. So that's the problem with quoting things out of context, taking an election speech for that matter. They've taken an election speech of Ambedkar where he's made certain remarks against Nehru and used that as if it's a view that Dr. Ambedkar gave on the in the Constituent Assembly. So it's not just chicanery; it's out and out brazen lies. I wouldn't
Absolutely.
even call it misrepresentation. And nobody from the opposition could point that out convincingly that this is what you're doing.
That's true. I mean, towards the end of this discussion, Professor Purvanand, I'll come to you now. That what is the message at the end of the 4 days of constitution debate? This debate was called in by the opposition. Rahul Gandhi and Kharge had insisted that we should have a debate on the constitution. But at the end of these 4 days, it looks like as if the fault lies with the opposition. They look unprepared. They look as if there was a complete lack of research. They could have done so much better, but they couldn't. So what have we really achieved at the end of 4 days, according to you?
What was the purpose of this debate? Because members were not addressing each other. This was for the people of India. And for the opposition, especially Congress, it should have been an occasion to reiterate the constitutional principles. And I agree with Puneet that they should have foreseen what BJP was going to do. And it was pretty much predictable on predictable lines, because this is what they have been saying for last 70 years. And their opposition to secularism, their opposition to socialism, their opposition to other principles. So the opposition, especially Congress, could have preempted that. It couldn't. And as I said, that they should have talked about the journey of the Constitution and the successes and the difficulties. For example, the first major obstacle that the then government faced when it tried to introduce Hindu Code Bill. So when you are talking about Dr. Ambedkar and others, why don't you talk about that moment? Because BJP has talked about many moments. And I don't remember whether in this discussion, this episode was discussed with the seriousness it deserved. And who had opposed Hindu Code Bill? And why did Ambedkar feel frustrated and felt that he should leave the cabinet? Because of this, he felt that Nehru was reluctant to pass Hindu Code Bill the way he wanted. So the difficulties of parliamentary democracy and from which quarters those constitution was facing this opposition, and the first attack on the parliament by the so-called sadhus associated with RSS and Vishwa Hindu Parishad. So when we talk about terrorist attack on parliament, why didn't you talk about that attack? They had burned down the house of Kamraj and others. And it was a very serious thing. People were killed, and Atal Bihari Vajpayee was there on the stage. So he was, in a way, tacitly involved in that. And very cleverly, as RSS people always do, he again evaded responsibility. So there were many episodes. And as I said, that the 75 years, when you mark completion of 75 years of constitution is a very serious moment, a very serious occasion. And you need to tell the people, you need to tell the young people about the debates in constituent assemblies, about how those our the members of the constituent assembly, which differed very bitterly with each other, tried to reconcile and tried to find a way, and how the ship of the nation, as Nehru had told R.K. Karanjia then, that these were turbulent waters, and we tried to steer the ship out of those turbulent waters. And I can say with some satisfaction that we have steadied it. So this is the struggle of the constitution, and the way constitution has evolved, and the way constitution has realized itself. Because in the preamble we don't say that the principles of equality, liberty and justice, it's not that they have been realized. It's a journey to realize those things. And what are the challenges? I think opposition should have taken its task seriously. It didn't do that, and there was no coordination, as Puneet said. That opposition India bloc should have spoken in one voice. It didn't do so, and they, as he said, that it was an act of self-preservation. So, but the crisis is deeper, and there was no sense of the crisis the nation is in and the constitution is in. And as I said, that disappointed me a lot.
Absolutely. These 4 days absolutely were a letdown as far as the opposition is concerned. And BJP, I think, clutched on to every opportunity with a lot of instances they quoted, with a lot of things which were put out of context, but they looked much better prepared. It seemed that their research department had done wonders for the BJP, the way all the BJP leaders came across. So it's highly disappointing. But yes, finally, the debate on the Samvidhan, the so-called Samvidhan, in the both houses has got over. So now
For
let's see
example,
what.
give me a minute. I
Yes.
think the opposition could have said that the first moment in the history of independent India when constitution became the talk of the town was Shaheen Bagh moment.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
why didn't we talk about it? I think constitution came out on the street. People started talking about it, and that was Shaheen Bagh movement. We didn't talk about it.
I
So
absolutely agree. That was a brilliant
that was
moment.
the level of unpreparedness or lack of seriousness, I believe.
Absolutely, but highly unfortunate. But we'll have to end it here. Thank you so much, Professor Apurvanand. Puneet, it was wonderful having you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.